Hey there, my name is Matt Wilhelmi, and I am the owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants. I'm also the author of Taboo Business Questions, What is Haunting Every Entrepreneur's Growth? And I'm really excited today because I am met by Andrea Herran of Focus HR, Uncomplicating the People Side of Business. Focus HR has been around since 2006, and Andrea has 6 employees. She is the authority on founder-led businesses that are experiencing people issues. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so, as we were kind of chatting before we started recording, we're going to go through a case study where they've got some people issues. They've got some things going on, some messy culture items. And, as the expert in this, particular area of business, I'm really looking forward to your insights. And so the particular case study and issue that we'd be talking about today is a company that I worked with a while ago where I was brought in as the CFO. They didn't have a CFO, but they had a really, really interesting business that was a service-based business, started by 2 guys, younger, early 20s. And they had actually hired over 20 employees. Andrea, can you imagine being in your 20s with a team of like 20 employees and trying to figure it all out?
No, that just sounds so overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, they certainly were a little bit overwhelmed, but they did not lack confidence. And so, what they were trying to kind of figure out with bringing me in was how to get their books organized and how to kind of manage their job costing system. And they had some payroll questions and all of the normal CFO things. But what I noticed was what I wanted to talk to you about is that they did have 20 employees, but over the year or so that I was working with them, they let go about half of their team and then they hired another 20 people. So there's massive, massive turnover. And that's where I really wanted to kind of stay focused and talk about this case study because they had a really, really profitable business if they could just figure out that people side of it, right? I'm sure you've seen that before. And I'd love to kind of get your take on it. What are some of the questions that maybe you'd want to know as the expert? How do you approach something like this?
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot to go through. Well, the first, you mentioned it was service-based, which is great. But my curiosity also lies in what kind of service-based. In other words, are they hiring people or bringing people on that have like a particular expertise? Or is it like customer service kind of roles? I don't know how much you can share about a little bit more about the business.
Yeah, sure. So the company they do like residential support. So think about like HVAC or electrician or plumbing, that kind of thing. They're in that kind of ballpark. I don't want to get too specific, but the people that they were hiring were salespeople, were installers, and were kind of coordinators a little bit. But most of the people that they were bringing in and then turning over very quickly were those installers and were those salespeople in their business.
Okay. No, that's okay. That helps me clarify the picture and understand a bit more. In my experience, you have to handle the turnover issue slightly different for sales than you do for the installer. So we're actually looking at, it's actually 2 issues because you go about them differently.
That's good.
Yeah, it's just because of the kind of the expertise that it's needed and what those positions are looking for in their job, their career, when they're with a company.
Yeah, if you could, Andrea, I know it sounds like it's 2 separate issues. I would love to stay focused on the sales people side of it, if that's okay, because I think that they got the installer part figured out. It was an issue of just like taking people's word that they were good installers instead of just like actually making sure that they're good installers. So I don't want to sound like that one was easy, but the sale, I feel like so many organizations have a hard time hiring and retaining really good salespeople because more often than not, and you can probably corroborate here, the salespeople do their best sales job during the interview. It's like the best. And then,
Absolutely.
yeah, how does that work? And then, then they get in there and you're like, well, but you said you were going to do all this stuff. How come you're not doing any of it? So, from that sales team, and that was where most of the turnover was, what would be some of the other things that you'd want to know about the sales team?
Well, first of all, how were they finding these people and who was involved in the process? So for example, something that I see a lot of people, they hire friends or recommendations from friends, things like that. Was that the case? How were what was the process to bring them on, to vet them out?
Yeah,
And
that's a really
then,
great one. So I think at first they did kind of go to friends and family,
yeah,
which they quickly realized was a bad idea. Especially with how young they were, right? Could you imagine being like 22 and then asking your friends for referrals to come work for your like super serious company that it didn't fit. I think that what they ended up kind of shifting to very quickly was using a search service like an Indeed or something like that, where they had like a job posting and people would apply, and so there wasn't that initial connection in that kind of second round of team members.
okay. And then the other question would be is, why were they leaving? Was it the company's decision to let them go because of performance, or were people leaving due to some other reason?
Yeah.
Were they voluntarily leaving due to some other reason?
Well, I can't speak for every single issue because I wasn't really involved in the exit interviews. Their approach to the CFO was, your office is in the back corner, so like don't come out.
Yeah.
But with the salespeople, what I sort of picked up on was that there was a lack of cohesion between what was talked about during the interview process, what was actually done kind of during their
Yeah.
regular jobs, and then like the follow through from the leadership with support and with training and with day-to-day kind of motivation. It just wasn't there. And so those are all probably elements of culture, I would guess.
Yep.
And an issue with the process overall, because I would imagine that you'd want to have a lot of congruency through that process, and they did not have that.
Right. Sorry, I'm just taking notes here so I don't forget anything that you've said, because there's so much here to dig into.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
It is. It really is. And unfortunately, it's not unique.
Mm.
Because I get that. It's like, oh, you probably have never seen this before. Well, I've been doing human resources for over 30 years. And my answer is usually, yes, I have. Not uncommon. So it's not you. It's just the evolution of a founder started business. So these are great.
Yeah, I mean, I think a piece of this puzzle is the quick evolution and quick growth track of these founders, right? They were
Yeah.
very quick realizing their mistakes and fixing it on the fly, as many entrepreneurs do, right? I don't want to sit here and sound like I've got it all figured out. I've been in business, while we're recording this video for 6 years, been in business consulting for almost 15. I don't have it all figured out, but I have grown, very, very quickly and tried to figure out a lot on the fly. So they were doing a decent job of that. But I think that, the evidence was that the turnover was it was rampant.
Right. And this is, and I've got another question for you that you may know about being on the CFO side of it. Were they commission based first?
They were. Yep.
They were. And were there issues after people left with how they would receive or not receive any ongoing commissions, if applicable?
That's an interesting question. Yeah. So the company, it was a one-time sale. So there wasn't like a recurring revenue stream. I've seen some compensation models that are more of like an account manager type of compensation model where you've built up a book of business. And so now there's an opportunity to pay, ongoing commissions because it's ongoing revenue. This wasn't the case. When they had a sale, they were relatively large sales, maybe in the 5-figure range typically. And so the bonuses were anywhere from, on the low end, maybe $1,000. And I saw some people get bonuses that were considerably more than that. But they weren't always the same. And so there were a lot of highs and lows. And I don't think that the people that they were hiring were accustomed to that. I mean, they were getting a base pay on top of these bonuses. I want to mention that as well. Right. But Andrea, I would love to hear your perspective on the comp model, because maybe that's something that we should be focusing on. Because in my perspective, when you've got a sales team that's tied to commissions, that ends up being like all they care about, and you lose a lot of the intrinsic, like going in and taking trainings, or going the extra step for somebody that maybe already got an order delivered that didn't go quite right, and other issues that maybe an account manager or somebody who has more of like a global feel for how these processes go might jump in. And if you're on commission and you're not going to make a commission by doing that, maybe you don't care.
Right. And well, salespeople in general, they're motivated by the money. They're motivated by that ongoing commission, because it's like a win every single time. Depending on the industry, and the type of people you bring, and you can determine what you want to bring in. There's 2 models that people use for sales. One is give them enough base to like cover bills, and then they have to earn the rest. And but they're looking to make them true hunters. It's like, look, just go out and go find the food and bring it back. We'll take care of it once they're here, which also has to do with the way the company is set up and how they handle those customers once they come, once they sign on the dotted line, what happens next. The other model is a bit of a hybrid between the hunter and the account manager. So you would give a bigger base, still have that commission, but now they're not reliant on the commission to live. It's not like I have to have this kind of commission in order to, to be able to pay my mortgage, in order to put food on the table, things like that. So it depends on what you want in that role. And salespeople come in, we'll say in 3 flavors. One is the hunter. They just go out, they find the sale, and then hand it off to somebody else. The second is that hybrid, where they do a little bit of both. And then third is the account manager. They're the relationship builders. They're the ones that are, we'll always touch base with them, making sure everything is going well. And we'll reach out, in, you mentioned it's a one-time sale, but you can still have repeat customers. So whatever the time frame may be, is it 3 months later? Is it 6 months later? Is it a year later? Whatever that is, they will follow up and make sure that they don't forget about ABC company.
Sure. Yeah, I think with those 3 different comp models, theirs was much more of that hybrid. But even in that hybrid, there's some gray area, right? It depends on how big of a base you want to give and how much time should be spent towards the account manager side, kind of nurturing relationships and maybe past clients and vendors and whatever else. And then like the going out and the hunting. So that's interesting.
Right. And part of that is dependent on how long or short their sales cycle is. Obviously,
it was pretty short. People would call in, they knew what their issue was, and the solution was either them or, maybe another person that does the exact same thing. There wasn't a lot of value creation or identifying needs. I mean, people were either calling in, or on the outbound side, it was either, do you need this thing or not? It wasn't really, there wasn't a lot of convincing.
Okay. All right. So when that's the case, then you can bring your base down a little bit more, because it's a shorter cycle. You may not need that relationship building as much. So you may want to push them a little bit more towards the hunter side than the account management side.
Yeah, but I
Because
think that's,
if a
I
product, if
agree
something
with
has a
you.
longer sales cycle, then you need, it's about the account management. It's about building that relationship, because it could take people 3 to 6 months before they make a decision. So the length of the average sales cycle makes a difference.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you still then would run the risk if they just don't cut it, right? Or um they're too reliant on those big, commission months. They might have this issue where people maybe get their first 2 or 3 commissions, are like, "Ooh, wow, like I hit these bumps, but wait a minute, I got to keep doing this forever. I don't want to do that, and then they leave, which stinks."
Yes.
So
Yeah.
maybe one of the
And
things
then
we'll talk
that's,
about, maybe one of the things we'll talk about is like talent retention in that side of it. I don't know if that's kind of where your brain's going. Maybe we'll get there in one of the next episodes.
it
But
kind of
before
all
we
gets
kind of
tied
move
together. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so, before we move on, Andrea, I wanna make sure, like, as the expert, HR, you're talking about, culture, we're talking about talent retention, compensation, all these different things that you're, certainly, equipped to kind of talk about. Are there any other details that you would wanna know about this company?
Um, let's see, just what their recruitment process looks like. How do they do that? Even on the big picture level, it doesn't have to go granular, but there's a lot of questions there. And
Well, I can clear
y-
that up pretty
yeah.
quickly. So, because I've been involved with a number of different recruitment processes. I'm sure not, as many as you, perhaps, but there are maybe, large companies that have relationships with maybe universities, for example, and they, set up a table at graduation day or at a job fair, and everybody knows that it's, I don't know, Wells Fargo or Northwestern Mutual or whatever that company is, and it doesn't really take a lot of sales there, right? It's like, oh, we know what that is. We're interested or not, and kind of moving on. This particular company is a startup, right? They're on the other end of
Mhm.
that spectrum without a lot of brand reputation. But I think that the two guys that were kind of running the company were just so energetic and so charismatic that they were able to kind of convince people to come work for them, and not in any sort of like coercive way, but just like their persona was just like so engaging. It was almost like, man, I would run through a wall for that person because they're so interesting, and they're going places, and you're getting in on the ground floor, and some of these types of words that are very, very true for startups. It was very attractive to their presentation, but that was basically after they got somebody on the phone, right? So they went through, they put their ad out on Career Builder, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, whatever, and people would apply like a lot of traditional recruitment processes. But then there would be a phone call with the founder, and that's kind of the extent of it. There'd be a couple of phone calls, and do you want the job or not, kind of thing. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yep. It does.
great.
It does. Yeah.
So before we wrap up our first episode here, Andrea, was there anything else with like information or background that maybe I could help provide to kind of give us some more clarity on this one?
Believe it or not, you've given me a lot of information. I can see a lot of things, and I just got to think about what are the top ones, without getting into it all. But no, I have a lot of information here. This is great.
That's what I wanted to hear. So, when you're talking to businesses, I'm sure you've got a couple of standard questions and then kind of see where that conversation goes, right? And it can go any number of different ways. I'm sure you've followed that rabbit trail into a number of different directions. But I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation. We're going to come back in a little bit, and we're going to talk about some issues that you see that they're going to have, because you've been there, you've done that, you're the expert. And so we're going to talk about that in our next episode. And then in our final episode, that's when Andrea gets to kind of, lay out maybe the solution, the recommendations and the advice, what should they do and how would you kind of help them? I think a lot of people are really going to be interested in that in our final episode. So thanks so much for joining me on this first one, and we will continue in just a moment.
Wonderful. Thank you.